I watched Victoria Sterling stand at the head of the mahogany conference table, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against the surface as she prepared to destroy my career in front of 12 men who had never once acknowledged my contributions. The irony was devastating. For 3 years, I had been the invisible architect behind every successful deal at Sterling & Associates, creating systems these executives couldn't even comprehend. But as Victoria opened her mouth to announce my termination, none of them realized they were about to witness the beginning of the most expensive mistake in corporate history. Victoria's voice cut through the conference room like a blade through silk. Effective immediately, we're implementing strategic restructuring to streamline our operations for the Blackwood merger. Her emerald green blazer caught the afternoon light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows as she gestured dismissively toward my chair. Cher Williams will be transitioning out of her role to pursue other opportunities. The 12 men around the polished table avoided my gaze, their attention focused on their smartphones or the legal documents scattered before them. Not one of them had ever bothered to learn my name properly, despite 3 years of delivering flawless project coordination that had saved their deals millions of dollars. They knew me only as Victoria's assistant, the quiet woman who somehow made their impossible deadlines achievable. Victoria slid a manila envelope across the table toward me with the casual indifference of someone discarding yesterday's newspaper. Human Resources has prepared your severance package. Security will escort you out once you've collected your personal belongings. The humiliation burned in my chest like swallowed fire. 3 months earlier, when Sterling & Associates first announced their pursuit of the Blackwood Industries merger, I had been assigned to create what Victoria called the integration framework. What she hadn't bothered to understand was that I had designed something far more sophisticated than a simple project timeline. Working 16-hour days in my cramped cubicle, I had mapped every conceivable connection between Sterling's investment banking operations and Blackwood's manufacturing empire. The digital ecosystem I created linked legal document repositories, financial projection models, regulatory compliance tracking, and interdepartmental communication protocols into one seamless network. My custom algorithms monitored dependencies between 23 different departments, automatically flagged potential conflicts before they became problems, and generated real-time reports that kept the $3 billion deal moving forward without a single missed deadline. But to Victoria and her executive team, I was just the project coordinator who somehow kept things organized. They never questioned how their presentations always contained the most current data, or why their regulatory submissions never faced delays. When Victoria presented my comprehensive risk analysis to the board of directors, she called it our team's innovative approach to merger management, never mentioning that I had spent 3 weeks creating predictive models that identified potential roadblocks 6 months in advance. During those late nights surrounded by empty coffee cups and financial spreadsheets, I had embedded myself so deeply into every aspect of the merger process that my departure would create an immediate crisis. But none of them understood the intricate web of dependencies I had created. They saw only the polished presentations and smooth operations, never the countless hours of behind-the-scenes work that made their success possible. The most devastating part was watching them take credit for innovations they couldn't even explain. When Blackwood's CEO praised Sterling's unprecedented organizational efficiency, Victoria basked in the recognition while I remained invisible in the background. She had no idea that my automated deadline tracking system was the reason their teams never missed a single regulatory submission, or that my cross-platform integration protocols were what allowed seamless communication between departments that had never successfully collaborated before. As I stood from the conference table clutching the severance envelope in my trembling hands, I realized that within days the entire merger process would begin collapsing without my oversight. The thought filled me with a complex mixture of devastation and anticipation. They had dismissed me like an inconvenience, but they were about to discover that I had been the foundation holding their entire operation together. Walking toward the elevator, I could hear Victoria already redirecting the conversation toward budget projections, her voice confident and commanding as she discussed timelines she didn't understand and systems she couldn't operate. The elevator doors closed behind me, and I felt the weight of 3 years of unrecognized expertise settling on my shoulders like a heavy coat. They had no idea what was coming. 1 week after my termination, I was settling into my new position at Meridian Consulting when my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Martinez, one of the few people at Sterling who had treated me with genuine respect. "Emergency meeting today. Brad Sullivan is taking over your projects. Thought you should know." Brad Sullivan was Victoria's 26-year-old nephew fresh from Harvard Business School with zero experience in merger management, but an abundance of confidence that his MBA could replace 3 years of specialized expertise. I had met him briefly during his internship the previous summer, when he had spent more time networking at company events than learning about actual operations. According to Sarah's subsequent messages, Brad had announced his intention to modernize and streamline the outdated systems inherited from previous management. The phrase stung, but I wasn't surprised. Victoria had always characterized my meticulous documentation and comprehensive backup protocols as excessive, despite the fact that they had prevented numerous disasters over the years. Brad's first week was apparently a masterclass in corporate arrogance. He dismissed my detailed handover notes as unnecessarily complex and decided that my filing system needed complete reorganization. What he didn't realize was that my seemingly simple folder structure was actually a carefully designed hierarchy that linked related documents across multiple departments and regulatory requirements. On Friday afternoon, the first disaster struck. Blackwood Industries requested a specific Environmental Protection Agency compliance document that had been filed 6 months earlier. Under my system, any authorized team member could locate it within 30 seconds using the cross-referenced digital catalog I had created. But Brad had deleted what he considered redundant backup files, not realizing that they contained alternate versions of legal agreements with different regulatory language. The panic spread through Sterling's offices like wildfire. Junior associates who had relied on my automated document retrieval system found themselves manually searching through thousands of files, trying to recreate organizational structures they had never needed to understand before. The EPA document was eventually located, but only after 6 hours of frantic searching that delayed the submission by an entire day. Victoria refused to acknowledge that there was any connection between my departure and the sudden operational difficulties. Instead, she called an emergency staff meeting where she berated her team for lack of attention to detail and professional responsibility. She stood at the front of the same conference room where she had terminated me, her navy blue suit pristine and her expression coldly disapproving as she lectured employees about efficiency and accountability. "These are basic organizational skills," Victoria declared, her voice sharp with frustration. "The Blackwood merger is the most important project in Sterling's history, and I will not tolerate sloppy work from any department." What Victoria didn't see, because she spent most of her time in executive meetings rather than managing actual operations, was the chaos that had begun spreading through every level of the organization. The automated reporting system I had designed started malfunctioning when Brad attempted to update the software without understanding the underlying code structure. Deadline notifications that had once been generated automatically now required manual tracking, leading to missed appointments and delayed submissions. The legal department discovered that their document version control system had been corrupted when Brad merged what he thought were duplicate files. The finance team found that their budget tracking spreadsheets no longer updated automatically, forcing them to manually input data that my integrated system had previously managed seamlessly. Even the Human Resources Department struggled when their employee scheduling protocols stopped functioning properly. Meanwhile, I was learning to navigate my new role at Meridian Consulting, initially trying to put Sterling and Associates behind me and focus on building fresh professional relationships. My new colleagues were impressed by my expertise in merger management, and I found genuine satisfaction in working for a company that valued thorough preparation and attention to detail. But it was impossible to completely ignore what was happening at my former workplace. Industry colleagues began mentioning strange rumors about Sterling's organizational struggles, and I received increasingly worried text messages from former co-workers who were drowning in confusion and overwork. Sarah Martinez sent me updates throughout that first week describing how employees were staying until midnight, trying to manually manage tasks that my automated systems had handled effortlessly. "People are asking about you constantly," she wrote. "Nobody wants to say it officially, but everyone knows things ran smoother when you were here." The weight of professional integrity kept me from responding directly to these messages. Despite my anger at Victoria's treatment, I maintained complete silence about Sterling's internal operations. But privately, I couldn't help feeling a growing sense of vindication as the company began experiencing exactly the problems I had anticipated when they dismissed my expertise so carelessly. 3 weeks after my termination, the first major deadline was missed. The comprehensive due diligence report for Blackwood Industries, which should have been submitted on a Tuesday morning, was finally delivered on Friday afternoon, and even then it contained multiple errors that I would have caught during my standard quality review process. Jonathan Blackwood, the CEO of Blackwood Industries, did not mask his displeasure during the conference call that followed. His voice carried the precise articulation of someone accustomed to billion-dollar decisions and zero tolerance for incompetence. "I'm concerned about Sterling's organizational capabilities," he told Victoria during a conversation that Sarah Martinez later described as absolutely brutal. Victoria attempted to deflect responsibility, explaining that the delay resulted from thoroughness in ensuring complete accuracy. But her justification sounded hollow even to her own team. Brad Sullivan, who had been tasked with overseeing the report's completion, fumbled through explanations about data verification and regulatory compliance without demonstrating any actual understanding of the issues involved. The atmosphere at Sterling and Associates became increasingly toxic as Victoria began throwing subordinates under the bus to protect her own reputation. She terminated 2 junior associates who had worked for the company for over 5 years, citing failure to meet merger timeline requirements. The remaining employees were ordered to work mandatory overtime, including weekends, to compensate for what Victoria characterized as inherited inefficiencies from previous management structures. During these extended work sessions, the whispered conversations became impossible to ignore. Employees openly discussed how smoothly operations had functioned when I was managing project coordination, and several senior associates began questioning why someone with my track record had been terminated just before the most critical phase of the merger process. The technical problems continued escalating throughout the following week. Brad's attempts to fix my remaining systems resulted in a catastrophic database corruption that wiped out 3 months of financial projections. The Information Technology Department worked 48 consecutive hours trying to recover the data, while the merger timeline continued slipping further behind schedule. Victoria's frustration manifested in increasingly erratic management decisions. She rearranged office assignments, restructured departmental hierarchies, and implemented new communication protocols that actually reduced efficiency rather than improving it. Her morning staff meetings became exercises in blame assignment rather than productive planning sessions. The breaking point came when Margaret Walsh, a board member with 30 years of experience in corporate mergers, began asking pointed questions about project management failures during routine progress meetings. Margaret had built her reputation on identifying operational weaknesses before they became expensive problems, and she possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of successful merger strategies. "I need to understand our current project management structure," Margaret told Victoria during a private meeting that lasted over 2 hours. "Who designed the original integration framework, and why have we deviated from protocols that were clearly working effectively?" Victoria's response was a masterpiece of corporate doublespeak, filled with references to strategic realignment and optimization of human resources. But Margaret was not someone who could be distracted by buzzwords and evasive language. She requested detailed documentation about project management decisions, including personnel changes and their impact on operational efficiency. "I want to meet with whoever designed the original merger framework," Margaret stated flatly. "Their insights could be valuable for understanding our current challenges." The request sent panic through Victoria's inner circle. They had no idea how to explain that the person responsible for their early success had been terminated for reasons that had nothing to do with professional competence. More importantly, they were beginning to realize that none of them actually understood the sophisticated systems I had created to manage the merger process. Meanwhile, I was gradually learning about the chaos through industry networking events and LinkedIn updates from former colleagues. The merger that had once been celebrated as Sterling's greatest achievement was now being discussed in whispered conversations as a cautionary tale about organizational mismanagement. My new position at Meridian Consulting was providing me with professional satisfaction and recognition that I had never experienced at Sterling. My supervisor regularly praised my attention to detail and innovative problem-solving abilities, and I was already being assigned to high-profile projects that utilized my specialized expertise. But I couldn't completely shake the feeling of watching a slow-motion disaster unfold from a safe distance. The $3 billion Blackwood merger represented more than just a corporate transaction. It involved thousands of employees whose jobs depended on successful completion and pension funds whose investments relied on the deal's profitability. The irony was overwhelming. Victoria had terminated me to assert her authority and streamline operations, but her actions had created exactly the opposite result. The system I had designed to ensure the merger's success was collapsing without proper oversight, and the deadline pressures that my automated protocols had prevented were now overwhelming Sterling's remaining staff. As March turned into April, the questions from Blackwood Industries became increasingly urgent, and the board's confidence in Victoria's leadership began showing visible cracks. My name was being mentioned constantly in internal discussions, but always in the context of problems that had emerged since my departure, rather than solutions I had previously provided. 6 weeks after my termination, Margaret Walsh began conducting what she later described as informal conversations with Sterling's junior staff members. Her approach was methodical and diplomatic, scheduling private meetings under the pretext of understanding operational workflows and identifying areas for improvement. Margaret possessed the kind of executive presence that comes from decades of successful corporate leadership. Her silver hair was always impeccably styled. Her questions were precisely targeted, and her ability to inspire trust made people want to confide in her. Unlike Victoria's intimidating interrogation style, Margaret's interviews felt more like mentoring sessions where employees could speak honestly about their professional experiences. During her conversation with Sarah Martinez, the truth about my contributions began emerging. Sarah described how I had worked 16-hour days designing integration protocols that connected previously incompatible systems and how my automated tracking mechanisms had prevented the regulatory delays that were now plaguing every aspect of the merger process. "Cher created something incredible," Sarah explained, her voice filled with genuine admiration. She could predict problems weeks before they happened and design solutions that prevented them from becoming disasters. We all knew she was brilliant, but I don't think anyone fully understood how much we depended on her expertise until she was gone. Margaret's expression grew increasingly serious as she learned about my innovative approaches to merger management. Sarah showed her examples of my work, including the risk assessment algorithms that had identified potential regulatory conflicts and the communication protocols that had kept 23 different departments coordinated without constant supervision. "Why was someone with this level of expertise terminated?" Margaret asked, her tone carefully neutral, but her curiosity clearly intensified. Sarah hesitated before explaining Victoria's official justification about restructuring and efficiency improvements, but her discomfort was obvious. "None of us really understood the decision," she admitted. "Everything started falling apart almost immediately after Cher left." Margaret's investigation continued throughout the following week as she interviewed employees from every department involved in the merger process. The pattern that emerged was consistent and troubling. I had been the central figure in designing and maintaining systems that everyone relied on, but nobody else understood. The finance department revealed that their budget tracking accuracy had decreased by 40% since my departure. The legal team admitted that their document management had become chaotic without my organizational protocols. Even the executive assistants acknowledged that their scheduling and communication systems had been designed and maintained by me, rather than by the senior executives who took credit for the efficiency. Margaret's most disturbing discovery came when she accessed archived email records and found my original project proposals from 18 months earlier. Reading through my detailed merger framework plans, she realized that I had not only anticipated the challenges Sterling was currently facing, but had designed specific solutions to prevent them. The documentation revealed that I had proposed creating backup protocols for every critical system, automated quality control mechanisms for all document submissions, and redundant communication channels to prevent the bottlenecks that were now destroying their timeline. More shocking still, Margaret discovered that Victoria had presented many of my innovations to the board as her own ideas, taking credit for budget projections that had saved the company millions of dollars. "This is extraordinary work," Margaret told her assistant while reviewing my comprehensive merger analysis. This woman predicted regulatory changes 6 months before they were announced and designed protocols to handle them seamlessly. Margaret's growing alarm about Victoria's leadership was compounded by the escalating crisis with Blackwood Industries. Jonathan Blackwood had requested a face-to-face meeting to discuss Sterling's recent performance issues, and his tone suggested that he was considering alternative merger partners. During the emergency board meeting that followed, Margaret presented her preliminary findings without mentioning my name directly. "Our current operational difficulties appear to stem from recent changes in project management personnel," she reported diplomatically. "I believe we need to reassess our human resources decisions and consider whether we may have inadvertently eliminated essential expertise." Victoria's response was predictably defensive. She insisted that any temporary inefficiencies resulted from the natural adjustment period associated with merger preparation, and she blamed external factors like regulatory changes and Blackwood's unrealistic expectations for the mounting problems. But Margaret was not satisfied with vague explanations. She requested complete documentation about personnel changes, including the specific reasons for my termination and the qualifications of my replacement. "I need to understand who was responsible for designing our original merger protocols," she stated firmly. "If we're going to solve our current problems, we need to learn from our previous successes." The investigation was creating panic in Victoria's inner circle. Brad Sullivan had been struggling with basic project coordination tasks that I had once handled effortlessly, and his inexperience was becoming impossible to conceal. Victoria's attempts to coach him on technical details were failing because she didn't understand the systems herself. Meanwhile, I was completely unaware of Margaret's investigation. My focus was entirely on my new responsibilities at Meridian Consulting, where I was helping design merger protocols for a mid-sized acquisition that would test my expertise in a completely different industry context. The irony of my situation was both frustrating and oddly satisfying. While my former employer was struggling with problems I could solve in my sleep, I was finally working for a company that valued my contributions and recognized my expertise. But the professional satisfaction couldn't completely eliminate the lingering anger I felt about Victoria's betrayal and the waste of the systems I had worked so hard to create. That anger turned to curiosity when I received an unexpected phone call on a Thursday afternoon. Margaret Walsh introduced herself as a Sterling & Associates board member who was conducting research about merger management best practices. "I'd like to speak with you about your experience in corporate integration projects," she said, her tone carefully professional. "Would you be available for a brief conversation?" The request filled me with conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted nothing more to do with Sterling & Associates, but another part was curious about what Margaret had discovered. After 3 years of having my expertise ignored and dismissed, the prospect of finally being asked for my professional opinion was unexpectedly appealing. "I'd be happy to share my insights," I replied, agreeing to meet with her the following week. I had no idea that this conversation would mark the beginning of the most dramatic reversal of my entire career. 8 weeks after my termination, I sat across from Margaret Walsh in a quiet corner booth at Gramercy Cafe, a downtown coffee shop far from Sterling's corporate headquarters. Margaret had chosen the location carefully, ensuring our conversation would remain private while her investigation continued. She ordered black coffee and opened her leather portfolio with the practiced efficiency of someone who had conducted countless corporate assessments. Her presence was both commanding and reassuring, with gray eyes that seemed to evaluate everything while missing nothing important. "I'm going to be direct with you, Cher," Margaret began, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making difficult decisions. "Sterling & Associates is facing a crisis that threatens the Blackwood merger, and my research suggests that you were instrumental in creating the systems that previously prevented these problems." Her statement hung in the air between us like a challenge. For months, I had maintained professional silence about Sterling's internal operations, despite the mounting evidence of their struggles. But Margaret's frank acknowledgement of my contributions created an opening I hadn't expected. "What specifically have you discovered?" I asked, curious about how much she had learned through her investigation. Margaret consulted her notes before responding. Your integration framework was far more sophisticated than anyone at Sterling currently understands. The automated systems you designed prevented regulatory delays, maintained document version control, and coordinated communication between departments that had never successfully collaborated before. She leaned forward, her expression growing more serious. What I can't understand is why someone with your expertise was terminated just before the most critical phase of the merger process. The question forced me to confront the painful reality of Victoria's decision. For weeks I had tried to rationalize her actions as misguided corporate restructuring, but Margaret's investigation had revealed the truth. My termination had been a catastrophic mistake that was now threatening the entire deal. Victoria never understood what I actually did, I explained, choosing my words carefully. She saw me as a project coordinator who kept things organized, not as someone who had designed complex systems that required specialized knowledge to maintain. Margaret nodded thoughtfully before pulling out a manila folder filled with printed emails. I've been reviewing archived correspondence, and I discovered something disturbing. Victoria presented your work to the board as her own innovations, taking credit for budget projections and risk assessments that you had created independently. The documentation she showed me was overwhelming. Months of my detailed analysis had been repackaged in presentations bearing Victoria's name, with my contributions erased from the record. Budget models that had taken me weeks to develop were described as senior management initiatives, while my regulatory compliance innovations were characterized as executive team strategies. This constitutes professional fraud, Margaret stated bluntly. Victoria has been accepting recognition and compensation for work she neither performed nor understood. The revelation filled me with a complex mixture of vindication and renewed anger. Seeing concrete proof of Victoria's deception was satisfying, but it also highlighted how completely my expertise had been exploited and dismissed. Margaret continued her presentation by outlining the escalating crisis at Sterling. 3 additional deadlines had been missed. Blackwood Industries was expressing serious concerns about Sterling's competence, and the board was facing pressure from institutional investors who were questioning the merger's viability. We estimate that Sterling has already incurred over $2 million in penalty fees and overtime costs directly related to operational inefficiencies that began after your departure, Margaret explained. More importantly, we're at risk of losing the entire $3 billion deal if we can't demonstrate competent project management within the next 10 days. The timeline was shocking. While I had been building my new career at Meridian Consulting, my former employer had been spiraling toward complete failure. The systems I had spent 3 years perfecting were now completely non-functional, and the expertise I had accumulated was irreplaceable on such a short timeline. Margaret closed her portfolio and looked directly at me. The board has authorized me to make you an offer. We want to bring you back to Sterling as Director of Strategic Integration with full authority over the merger process and a compensation package that reflects your actual value to the organization. The offer was stunning in its scope. The position Victoria had terminated me from was being recreated at an executive level with a salary increase of 60% and an equity stake in the merger's success. More importantly, I would have complete autonomy to rebuild the systems and hire the personnel necessary to salvage the Blackwood deal. We need someone who understands both the technical requirements and the human dynamics involved in managing complex integrations, Margaret continued. Based on my investigation, you're the only person at Sterling who possesses that combination of expertise and experience. The irony was almost overwhelming. 8 weeks earlier, Victoria had dismissed me as an expendable project coordinator whose departure would streamline operations. Now the board was offering me an executive position to clean up the mess that my termination had created. But the offer came with significant challenges. Rebuilding functional systems within 10 days would require working with many of the same people who had ignored my contributions for 3 years. The technical work was achievable, but the political dynamics would be considerably more complex. What authority would I have over personnel decisions? I asked, already considering the changes that would be necessary. Complete authority, Margaret replied without hesitation. You would report directly to the board rather than through existing management structures, and you would have discretionary power over staffing, budget allocation, and operational protocols. The position would give me everything I had wanted during my 3 years at Sterling recognition for my expertise, authority over project decisions, and the resources necessary to implement comprehensive solutions. More importantly, it would provide an opportunity to prove that my innovations could succeed when properly supported and understood. "I accept," I said, extending my hand to Margaret. "When do I start?" Margaret smiled for the first time during our conversation. "Tomorrow morning. We've already prepared your office and cleared the necessary approvals. Victoria Sterling will be terminated for cause this afternoon." The final piece of justice was almost anticlimactic. After months of exploitation and professional humiliation, Victoria's downfall would be swift and decisive. But more important than revenge was the opportunity to salvage the merger and validate the expertise that had been so carelessly dismissed. As I walked back to Meridian Consulting to submit my resignation, I realized that the most challenging phase of my career was just beginning. Saving the Blackwood merger would require not only technical excellence, but also the leadership skills necessary to rebuild confidence and restore operational efficiency within an impossibly short timeline. The next morning would mark my transformation from invisible contributor to recognized leader, but success would depend on my ability to perform a professional miracle under the most intense pressure of my entire career. 10 weeks after my original termination, I walked through Sterling & Associates' marble lobby as Director of Strategic Integration, carrying the keycard to Victoria's former corner office and a mandate from the board to save the most important merger in the company's history. The reactions from my former colleagues ranged from genuine relief to barely concealed resentment. Sarah Martinez greeted me with tears of gratitude, explaining how the chaos of recent weeks had nearly driven her to resign. Several junior associates who had worked closely with me expressed enthusiasm about returning to functional operational protocols, but I also sensed hostility from some of Victoria's allies, particularly those who had benefited from taking credit for my work. Brad Sullivan, who had been demoted back to his original intern-level position, avoided eye contact completely during our brief encounter in the hallway. My new office was a dramatic upgrade from the cramped cubicle where I had spent 3 years developing innovative solutions while remaining invisible to senior management. Floor-to-ceiling windows provided a panoramic view of the city, and the mahogany desk was large enough to accommodate multiple computer monitors and project planning materials. But the luxury was irrelevant compared to the magnitude of the challenge ahead. Margaret Walsh had given me a comprehensive briefing about the current crisis. Blackwood Industries was threatening to withdraw from the merger unless Sterling could demonstrate dramatic improvement within 72 hours. 3 critical regulatory approvals were stalled in bureaucratic limbo. The financial integration timeline was completely broken, and Jonathan Blackwood was actively exploring alternative partnership opportunities. My first priority was assessing the full extent of the damage to the systems I had originally designed. Brad's attempts to modernize my protocols had created cascading failures throughout the entire operational structure. Document version control was chaotic, automated reporting had stopped functioning completely, and interdepartmental communication had reverted to inefficient manual processes. The database corruption was particularly severe. 3 months of financial modeling had been lost, along with regulatory compliance tracking and timeline coordination protocols that had taken me months to develop. Rebuilding these systems from scratch would normally require weeks of programming and testing, but I had less than 3 days to restore full functionality. Working through the first night, I began reconstructing the automated integration network that had made Sterling's early merger success possible. Fortunately, I had maintained personal backup copies of all my original code and documentation stored on encrypted drives that Brad had never discovered during his destructive renovation. The technical reconstruction was challenging but straightforward compared to the human element of the crisis. I needed to coordinate with Blackwood's technical team while simultaneously managing Sterling's demoralized staff and rebuilding confidence with regulatory agencies that had lost faith in Sterling's competence. My strategic decision was to establish direct communication with Jonathan Blackwood, bypassing the diplomatic protocols that had allowed misunderstandings to escalate. I placed a call to his office on Tuesday morning, introducing myself as Sterling's new Director of Strategic Integration and requesting an immediate video conference to discuss specific solutions to the outstanding issues. Jonathan Blackwood was a formidable presence, even through video chat with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that conveyed both intelligence and impatience. His reputation for decisive action had built Blackwood Industries into a manufacturing empire, and he had little tolerance for corporate incompetence. "I've been told that Sterling has brought in new management to address our concerns," he said without preamble. "I need to understand exactly what changes have been implemented and how they will prevent future delays." I presented him with a detailed recovery plan that outlined specific timelines for regulatory approvals, documented solutions for the technical integration challenges, and proposed communication protocols to ensure transparent progress reporting. Most importantly, I showed him the automated tracking systems that would prevent the missed deadlines and coordination failures that had characterized recent weeks. "This is impressive," Jonathan acknowledged after reviewing my presentation. "How quickly can these systems be fully operational?" 48 hours, I replied confidently. "I designed the original protocols, and I can restore them more efficiently than rebuilding from scratch." His expression showed cautious optimism for the first time in weeks. "If you can deliver on these commitments, Blackwood will proceed with the merger as originally planned." The next 24 hours were a blur of 18-hour workdays, strategic phone calls, and collaborative problem-solving with team members who had been struggling without proper system support. I brought in 3 former colleagues from other firms who understood my technical approach and could assist with the most complex reconstruction tasks. The breakthrough came on Wednesday evening when my restored automated compliance system successfully submitted all outstanding regulatory documents with proper formatting and complete documentation. The Environmental Protection Agency approval that had been delayed for weeks was processed within 6 hours, and the Securities and Exchange Commission confirmed that our financial disclosures met all requirements for merger completion. But the greatest challenge was still ahead. Victoria's former assistant, Jessica Thompson, who had been passed over for promotion when I was brought in, attempted to sabotage the database reconstruction by deleting crucial files from the restored system. Her timing was calculated to occur during the final testing phase, when any data loss would be impossible to recover within our deadline. Fortunately, the new security protocols I had implemented detected the unauthorized access immediately and preserved backup copies of the deleted files. The automated audit trail provided clear evidence of Jessica's deliberate sabotage, leading to her immediate termination and potential legal action for corporate vandalism. The attempted sabotage actually strengthened my position by demonstrating the value of comprehensive security measures and redundant backup systems. When I showed Margaret Walsh the detailed logs of Jessica's actions, she was both impressed by my preparation and appalled by the deliberate attempt to destroy the merger. "Your foresight in implementing these security measures may have saved the entire deal," Margaret commented while reviewing the evidence. Victoria's influence clearly extended beyond her official termination. Thursday morning brought the moment of truth. Jonathan Blackwood personally called to congratulate Sterling on what he described as a miraculous turnaround in organizational efficiency and professional competence. The regulatory approvals had been completed ahead of schedule, the financial integration protocols were functioning flawlessly, and the communication between both companies had reached unprecedented levels of clarity and cooperation. "I want to personally acknowledge your leadership in transforming this situation," Jonathan told me during our final status call. "Blackwood Industries looks forward to a successful partnership with Sterling under your continued oversight." The validation was overwhelming. 8 weeks earlier, I had been terminated as an expendable project coordinator. Now I was receiving direct praise from the CEO of a billion-dollar corporation for salvaging the most important business deal in Sterling's history. But more important than personal recognition was the knowledge that thousands of employees from both companies would keep their jobs, and institutional investors would see returns on their pension fund investments. The merger I had originally designed systems to support was finally moving forward with the efficiency and competence that I had always known was possible. 3 months after my triumphant return to Sterling & Associates, I stood before a packed auditorium at the Downtown Business Conference accepting the Industry Leadership Award for Dealmaker of the Year. The $3 billion merger between Sterling and Blackwood Industries had been completed 2 weeks ahead of schedule and $15 million under budget, setting new standards for integration efficiency and cross-corporate cooperation. The merger's success had transformed both companies in ways that extended far beyond financial metrics. Sterling's operational protocols were now being studied by business schools as examples of innovative project management, while Blackwood's manufacturing divisions had adopted our automated quality control systems throughout their international operations. My promotion to Vice President of Strategic Operations had come with recognition that went far beyond salary and title. The equity stake I had negotiated meant that the merger's success directly contributed to my financial future, while the autonomy I had demanded allowed me to implement comprehensive reforms that would prevent the chaos I had inherited. But the most satisfying aspect of my new position was the opportunity to mentor junior staff members who reminded me of my former invisible status. I had established an innovation fellowship program that identified and promoted employees whose contributions might otherwise go unrecognized, ensuring that expertise and dedication would be rewarded regardless of office politics or corporate hierarchy. Victoria Sterling's downfall had been swift and complete. Her termination for cause had eliminated any severance compensation, while the evidence of fraudulent representation to the board had resulted in potential legal action that would follow her to any future employment. The professional references she had once taken for granted were now sources of embarrassment and career-ending liability. More importantly, Victoria had been forced to acknowledge my contributions in a formal statement that was distributed to all Sterling employees and filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission. The document explicitly credited me with designing the integration systems that had made the merger possible, and it apologized for management decisions that temporarily disrupted successful operational protocols. The statement represented more than legal compliance. It was a public acknowledgement of the expertise that had been dismissed and the innovation that had been exploited. Reading Victoria's carefully crafted words of professional contrition felt like vindication for 3 years of unrecognized excellence and personal humiliation. The industry recognition had extended far beyond Sterling's internal acknowledgement. Corporate Finance magazine featured my integration methodology on their cover with a detailed analysis of how my automated systems had revolutionized merger management. The Harvard Business Review published my article about inclusive leadership and recognition of diverse expertise, which became required reading in several graduate business programs. Speaking engagements and consulting opportunities had multiplied beyond my capacity to accept them. Companies throughout the financial industry were requesting presentations about my integration protocols, while executive search firms were offering positions that would have been unimaginable during my years of invisibility. But the most meaningful recognition came from my former colleagues, particularly those who had suffered under Victoria's mismanagement during the weeks following my termination. Sarah Martinez had been promoted to Senior Project Coordinator with responsibilities that utilized the organizational skills she had developed while working with my systems. Several junior associates had received overdue promotions once their contributions became visible under competent leadership. The cultural transformation at Sterling extended throughout every level of the organization. Board meetings now included detailed presentations about operational excellence and employee recognition, while management evaluations incorporated assessments of how effectively executives supported and promoted their subordinates' innovations. Margaret Walsh had become not only a professional mentor, but also an advocate for systemic changes in corporate governance. Her investigation of my situation had revealed similar patterns at other companies, leading to board-level initiatives aimed at preventing the waste of talent and expertise that had characterized my experience. "Your case represents a broader problem in American business," Margaret explained during one of our monthly leadership meetings. "Too many organizations are structured to reward visibility rather than competence, and too many talented people are marginalized because they don't fit traditional executive profiles." The reforms we had implemented at Sterling were becoming models for other companies seeking to identify and promote overlooked talent. My story had been featured in business journals as an example of how operational excellence could emerge from unexpected sources and how organizational success required recognizing expertise regardless of its packaging. Personal growth had accompanied professional achievement in ways I had never anticipated. The experience of rebuilding my career from termination to executive leadership had taught me lessons about resilience, self-advocacy, and the importance of demanding recognition for excellent work. Most importantly, I had learned that true power comes not from position or title, but from competence, integrity, and the courage to stand up for oneself when facing injustice. The skills I had developed during 3 years of invisible contribution had been valuable, but the confidence I had gained through surviving professional betrayal and achieving vindication was transformational. The merger that had once seemed like the end of my career had become the foundation for opportunities I had never imagined possible. But more significant than personal success was the knowledge that my experience could help other talented professionals avoid similar exploitation and achieve the recognition their expertise deserved. Standing at the podium that evening, looking out at an audience of business leaders who now knew my name and respected my contributions, I reflected on the journey that had brought me from corporate invisibility to industry recognition. The path had been painful, but it had led to a level of professional fulfillment that would have been impossible without first experiencing the depths of dismissal and humiliation. The greatest lesson I had learned was that sometimes the most devastating professional setbacks create opportunities for growth and achievement that would never have emerged under comfortable circumstances. Victoria's decision to fire me had been intended to assert her authority and eliminate someone she perceived as a threat to her control. Instead, her actions had revealed the depth of my expertise, exposed the weakness of her leadership, and created the conditions for my transformation from invisible contributor to recognized innovator. The $3 billion merger that had failed because of me became the foundation for success that exceeded every expectation. The irony was perfect. Victoria had tried to diminish my influence by removing me from the organization, but her actions had ultimately amplified my impact far beyond what would have been possible if she had simply recognized and supported my contributions from the beginning. As I concluded my acceptance speech that evening, I posed a question to the audience that had been central to my own transformation. How many talented professionals in your organizations are creating value that goes unrecognized? And what systems have you implemented to ensure that expertise is identified, supported, and promoted regardless of traditional hierarchies? The question sparked conversations that continued long after the conference ended, as business leaders began examining their own organizations for signs of overlooked talent and unexploited innovation. My story had become more than personal vindication. It had become a call to action for creating workplaces that valued competence over politics and results over relationships. Thank you for joining me on this journey from professional invisibility to industry recognition. I hope my experience encourages you to advocate for your own expertise and to recognize the valuable contributions of colleagues who might not fit traditional leadership profiles. Please like this story. If you found inspiration in the power of persistence and competence, subscribe for more stories about overcoming workplace challenges. Share this with someone who might need encouragement to stand up for their professional worth, and comment below about your own experiences with workplace recognition or the times when you've had to fight for the respect your expertise deserved. Your support means everything, and I wish you the courage to demand the recognition your talents have earned and the wisdom to never let anyone diminish the value of your contributions.